The history of the American Revolution mainly focuses on the men of the conflict. Any foray into the women of the period will probably mention Betsy Ross's creation of the American flag. And indeed, Mrs. Ross is probably the most well-known woman of antebellum history, despite many tries to discredit her story, as Laurel Thatcher Ulrich's article on Betsy pointed out in 2007. However, as the famous quotation goes, behind every great man is a great woman, and John Adams is no exception. Behind him stands Abigail Adams, an incredible woman in her own right. She had little formal education and did nothing shocking or blatantly courageous to earn her place in history. For most of her husband's career, she stayed at home during his long absences, raising their children, managing the household, and keeping up with her husband through correspondence, as the Massachusetts Historical Society points out in their biographical sketches on the Adams. These extended times of separation were not easy on Abigail. On May 6, 1777, she wrote to her husband, "'Tis 10 days, I believe, since I wrote you a line, yet not 10 minutes passes without thinking of you. 'Tis 4 months wanting 3 days since we parted. Every day of the time I have mourned for the absence of my friend, and felt a vacancy in my heart which nothing can supply." In addition, during their marriage, Abigail raised 4 children to adulthood, but lost 2 daughters. One was just over a year old at the time of death, Susanna. The other, Elizabeth, was stillborn, as G.J. Barker Benefield points out in his article about Abigail Adams. In short, Abigail's life was not easy, and her struggles were compounded by a husband who was either way on the circuit court, serving on the Continental Congress, or acting as an ambassador in Europe. Abigail Adams may have stayed at home and watched the children, but she did speak up for the women of America to her husband. She knew laws were being written and a country was being formed even before independence was declared. And on March 31st, 1776, she told her husband, who was serving in the Continental Congress, "I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And, by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors." A few sentences later, she continues, "If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." Continuing these thoughts, May 7, 1776, Abigail stated, "I cannot say that I think you very generous to the ladies, for whilst you are proclaiming peace and goodwill to men, emancipating all nations, you insist upon retaining an absolute power over wives." Abigail Adams' desires were not met in the early documents of American history, as we know, and women's suffrage would not be fully realized until the 19th Amendment in 1920. But women today can look back to her as an example of a woman who, in America's early days, realized that America's ladies would desire the same rights as America's men, the rights to vote, to be represented in their government, the rights that, well, as Thomas Jefferson said, all men are created equal. Ultimately, Abigail Adams may have been an ordinary stay-at-home mom who also had to deal with a husband frequently absent on business. Even so, she knew what the new United States would be about, and today she can be remembered both as a woman who knew her place in society and who knew the freedoms that all Americans, no matter skin, color, or gender, would want.